I'm here on the job site with Dale, who's a framing contractor.
Hey, good morning.
Dale traded up to Geico Commercial Auto Insurance for all his business vehicles. We're here where he needs us most.
Yep, they sure are.
We make it easy for him to save on all his insurance needs, all in one place, with coverage that fits his business and bottom line. Oh, I shouldn't have looked down.
It's all right.
We're so far up here.
Look at me. Take a deep breath.
No, I'm good. So good.
Get a commercial auto insurance quote today at geico.com and see how much you could save. It feels good to Geico.
So I'm often asked the benefits of eliminating alcohol and if this is something that I should try, if this is something that I should start to explore. And one of the big things that people find is that even if they're not drinking every single day, alcohol can still be affecting their life on a frequent basis. That might be from a physical perspective, that it's contributing to health concerns. It might be from a mental health perspective where maybe we're experiencing anxiety or depression. But regardless, there is an opportunity for you to explore what life is like without alcohol to see if that's something that might provide benefit for you.
Yay Networks.
A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. So I'm really excited about the guest that I have joining us today. She is the author of a book called How to Eat to Change How You Drink. So truly, how to eat, how you change, how you drink. So what we're putting into our bodies, how we're fueling our bodies, and how that nutrition can change our relationship with alcohol, our cravings with alcohol. So if you've tried before and things just, you find that you're constantly getting pulled off track, that maybe it just seems really challenging. Every day you wake up and you're like, okay, I'm going to do the alcohol free for 40. I'm doing dry January. And then it's like, okay, well, tomorrow. If each day you're having that challenge or what seems like it should feel so easy and it doesn't, there's a lot there. There's a lot that can be going on in so many different levels. And I think that there hasn't been enough focus to how our nutrition does truly influence our relationship with alcohol. So we're joined today by Dr. Brooke Scheller, the author of How to Eat to Change How You Drink. She is a doctor in clinical nutrition. I immediately loved this book. I opened it up to just flip through a few pages right whenever I received it. And 2 hours later, I was sitting down, I had my glasses on, like taking notes, underlining things. Every single page resonated with me. I was so impressed with how much of a candid approach she shares things with in this book, yet also very science-based, and how much I think that you'll find it so relevant. And she really speaks so well to so many of us. And it's not finger wagging at all. It's not preachy. It's not too sciencey. It's truly just helping us to increase an awareness, again, of how nutrition influences how we crave or don't crave or our relationship with alcohol. All right. So with that, welcome, Brooke.
I'm so thrilled to be here, Molly. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. So when your publicist reached out with the book, and the book is called How to Eat to Change How You Drink. And immediately I was like, this is brilliant. So, for you as a doctor of clinical nutrition, the approach that you take, it was like, I felt like I knew you as I was reading this book. I immediately was like, I love you. I love your approach. I love how your writing style is so conversational to the reader. It's also really non-threatening. And you and I chatted just a bit before we started this podcast. This is your first book. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was so important for me to make this something that felt like you were learning from a friend and not from someone who was coming down and, recommending all of these things to you, but instead sharing my experience and my journey throughout this process, because I also struggled with alcohol and really came to this conclusion and came to this body of work through my own experience and my background in nutrition, and marrying those two things together, which has just been such a really amazing opportunity for me to share those gifts and those strengths with the world. So it's been really amazing.
So share with our listeners a bit about, your background as a doctor of clinical nutrition, what the school has looked like, what that education has looked like through the years to kind of get you to this point. And then I'd love to talk about a bit about how the book and this journey came to be, and then we'll get into the meat of it.
Yeah. So by trade, I'm a doctor of clinical nutrition. I have a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate in nutrition. And I kind of embarked on that journey because I had gotten into fitness and exercise in my late teens and took a nutrition class and really fell in love with learning about vitamins and minerals and how all of these different things can affect our body, can affect our brain. And I really believe that nutrition is just such an under-discussed topic in our society as it relates to symptoms and the way that we feel and the way that, people struggle on a chronic basis with all different types of health conditions, that nutrition really does play a role, and many people just aren't familiar with how. And I, when I did my undergraduate education in nutrition, I always felt like I wanted to kind of dabble more in the holistic side of things. So I decided to get a master's, and throughout my master's training, which was in holistic health and wellness, I felt like I wanted to know more. I'm the kind of person that I really like to understand the inner workings of things and how the body works. And it wasn't enough for me to hear like vitamin C is good for your immune system. My question is always, yeah, but why? Why is that good for your immune system? And how is that actually working? And so I decided to get a doctorate as well. And I embarked on a clinical training, a doctoral level clinical training that was not a PhD. It's a clinical training. So we did do research, but we also did a residency portion of our program. And so I'm classically trained as a clinician. And my background is kind of part clinical practice and part startup innovation, which is really what helped me bring functional sobriety to light, is having kind of that dual background and both experiences. And throughout all of my training and throughout all of my career, my early part of my career, I was a heavy drinker. And I, was always around other wellness experts who were also drinkers. And it's not hard to find people who are in the health and wellness space who still drink. And for a long time, we really believed that it wasn't that bad to consume alcohol. I think we're learning more through the studies that are coming out over the last couple of years, how detrimental it really is for us. But in the later years of my drinking in 2019 and into the pandemic, I really felt like I was living a double life. I was consuming high amounts of alcohol. I mean, I was drinking probably 5, 6, 7 days a week. And at the same time, trying to promote health and speak to the importance of things like our gut and our brain health and nutrients and supplements and all of these things as a professional. And yet I was really struggling with alcohol myself. And it wasn't until I made that decision to eliminate alcohol in the spring of 2021 that I really recognized that there was a big gap in the discussion around alcohol cessation, and how nutrition can play a role with that, but also some of the impacts that alcohol has on areas like our gut health and our gut microbiome, like our hormones and cortisol levels, like nutrient deficiencies, and how that affects the brain and can contribute to mood imbalances or anxiety disorders. And so it really just became a mission of mine to start to bring this information to light and tie these pieces together.
I think there's been so much over the years, like you said, of, a drink a day, a glass of wine a day is good for us. There's been a lot from the alcohol industry. There's been a lot of, we always sound like conspiracy theorists as we say this, but there's a huge lobbying space for alcohol that is supporting researchers that are coming out with the messaging, it's good for us. But when we really start to look at what those studies are about and the newer research that's coming out, we're seeing that, you know what, that drink a day, not so much. And so that's really become dated guidance. And so I'd say to our listeners too, if you have a physician that is saying, yeah, drink a glass of wine a day, it's good for you, dated advice. And not to be critical of other providers and practitioners, but that's one of those things that maybe they haven't been current on the new studies that are coming out. And it's been probably a lot over the past 5 years, but even over the past 10 years that we're seeing. And just like Brooke was saying, some of those very things that we're reaching for alcohol for, we have a stressful day. It's going to help us unwind. It's that transition time between work and when we want to, get ourselves into a better headspace to enjoy the evening with our friends or family. All of those things that we're doing, a lot of times we're actually doing the reverse with alcohol. So we may be reaching for it to have that relaxation effect, yet it's actually at the same time increasing our body's our anxiety response. And so there's so much that is actually very cyclical to it. And it seems that that's really where you had fallen. And one of the things that I read that resonated, and I know so many people in our Alcohol Free for 40 challenge have also said this. I know that I myself, so many people have shared similar, that each day you would say, okay, I overdrank yesterday. I feel terrible. I feel like crap right now. And you would wake up and say, this is going to be a better day. I'm going to have this intent. Today's going to be like a clean day. I'm not going to drink. And then by afternoon, you felt like you had caved, you had crashed. And so there's that concept of willpower that I think a lot of us feel like, why can't I do it? Why can't I, even one day or 2 days? Let's take a minute to share about Caraway Home, our partner for this week's episode. I especially love this for those who are looking to do a bit of a New Year's refresh. There are so many collections of their kitchenware to explore that there's truly a Caraway solution for every kind of cook. Their thoughtfully designed sets and complementary storage makes getting and staying organized easier than ever. The non-toxic, chemical-free ceramic coating means that food can be prepared with peace of mind that no strange chemicals will leak into your healthy ingredients. Every set is available in beautiful elevated colors to fit with any design aesthetic. We love our Caraway cookware. It's our go-to for everything from seared salmon to creamy spinach to our Eat Fit candied macadamias. Visit carawayhome.com/fueled to take advantage of this limited time offer for 10% off your next purchase. This deal is exclusive for our listeners, so visit carawayhome.com/fueled or use promo code FUELED at checkout. Caraway, non-toxic cookware made modern. So kind of walk us through that, like what that looked like, what that felt like, and then how that really helped shape the fabric of this book and how you laid out this book.
Yeah, I think you bring up such an important point when we talk about willpower, that we always take this like this personal approach when it comes to these things. Like if I'm struggling to cut back, then it means that there's something wrong with me, that I am not strong enough, that I am not capable of doing this. And one of the things that really sits beneath the inspiration for the book is, as I mentioned earlier on in my story, I'm the kind of person that always needs to know why, right? So if I am the person that has struggled with alcohol, or if you, Molly, are someone who has felt like you've had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol before, well, why is that happening? Why does that happen to me or to you and maybe not to somebody else? Why is it easy for one person to say no to a drink and harder for another person to say no to a drink? What I know is that there's biology and physiology behind all of this, right? And so my question became, well, what's really sitting underneath some of these things? What is sitting beneath someone's willpower to say yes or to say no to having a drink? And when it comes down to it, there are these things, these kind of underlying intricacies in our bodies, and it varies from person to person, but there are certainly themes across the board that we can talk about when it comes to why it might be hard to say no to a drink at 5 p.m. for one person, and another person might be able to give it up and no big deal, right? And so it's really interesting when we think about taking the willpower out of it and saying, this isn't about you not being strong enough to do this. This tells me that there's an opportunity for us to support you in a different way so that you don't have to rely so much on that actual willpower.
White knuckling it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is where a lot of the nutrition comes in. And over the years, I've had clients I work with, you specifically don't use the word alcoholic in the book. And one of the things I love is that you talk more, instead of saying, we're going to label things as an alcoholic, it's more about what is your relationship with alcohol? And I think chapter 1 is called, or part 1 is it time to change your relationship with alcohol? And that's the language that myself and our team, we use around it, because it isn't a finger wagging or are you drinking too much? It's not anything about a good or a bad or identifying any of that. It's simply, what is that relationship? Is it a healthy? Is it not healthy? Is it supporting you in reaching these goals or not? And so the first part of your book, like how to eat to change how you drink, is really about establishing that. And you break it into 3 types of drinkers, really. You call it the drinking archetypes: social drinker, stress drinker, and habitual drinker.
Habitual drinker. Yes.
And so we have so much that we want to cover, so I won't go too much into that with our listeners. But I think, Brooke has almost like a little, let's walk through, let's answer these questions, let's help us identify for ourselves. And a lot of times we may be excusing certain things or kind of brushing it under the rug. But when we really kind of take that honest look, okay, what are the reasons that we're reaching for alcohol there? And then, like you said, there's so many reasons under it. It could be, genetic tendencies. You have a history of addiction in your family. But there's nutrition too. And over the years, when I've worked with, I can think 2 decades ago, clients that I've had who have told me who were, as they would refer to themselves, like recovering alcoholics. And several noted very specifically, wow, I crave alcohol less when I am following the nutrition protocol that we've outlined and the plan that we've outlined, that they have fewer cravings for alcohol. And some of it is at the very basic level, keeping those blood sugars level, our insulin levels stable, just kind of keeping everything on more of that even keel versus like the highs and lows of energy and glucose levels. And it's also, I think, another element can be giving someone, even as simple as giving someone that positive to focus on of what are we doing instead of, again, just like white knuckling it and saying willpower. So if someone is like, having a steady diet of sugar and soft drinks and chips or cookies, or even perceived as healthy, like sugary yogurts or cereals that might seem like they're healthier, granolas and bars, but they're really more of a processed, refined, and we're having those highs and lows, we're setting ourselves up for these energy dips. And those, as you note in the book, when our glucose levels drop, we're almost priming ourselves and setting ourselves up for more cravings for alcohol.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into this around deprivation. Like, I think there's a big overlap with alcohol reduction or cessation and food, or quote unquote dieting, that goes into the same mentality of taking everything away and having to just, live this kind of bland, boring existence of, eating carrots and celery sticks, right? And it's the same thing with alcohol, that it's like, well, that's no fun to take away alcohol because, we think that it's really providing us with this source of stress relief, or this, this elixir that helps us to socialize with other people. And I just want to jump back to mention or to note on something that you mentioned earlier, which has to do with the types of drinkers and people identifying as an alcoholic or not identifying as an alcoholic. And what it really comes down to is, it doesn't really matter what you want to call yourself, right? If you are the only one who knows, if you feel like you have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, and if you want to change that, you don't have to fit into any one box or category to decide to do that. So that's been one of the misconceptions for a long time, that only people who are quote unquote alcoholics are those who quit drinking. And that's not necessarily true. You could be drinking once a week and feel like it's affecting your life negatively in some way and want to decide to quit. Sometimes it's a little bit harder when we're in that gray space to quit, because, we things aren't, quote, bad enough yet, or maybe we don't really recognize the true health effects and things that are happening to our body as the result of the alcohol consumption. But I've been speaking a lot about lately that you don't need to be drinking alcohol every day for alcohol to be affecting your life every day, right? Because it does have this carryover effect in the way that it affects things like our cortisol levels, in the way that it affects things like our blood sugar. And blood sugar is one of those really important areas that I talk about, and really something that everyone who's listening can start to implement in right away, not only to manage cravings for alcohol, but also those sugar cravings that come up typically as the result. And for people who have a history of heavier alcohol consumption, we have this tendency toward experiencing more of a hypoglycemic type of response where we are experiencing low blood sugar a bit more frequently than the average person might. And because of that,
Do you mean
anytime
like when they're not drinking, they'll experience that low, or just anytime they're more prone to low glucose levels, low blood sugar levels?
they're more prone to low glucose levels across the board. So alcohol is going to directly affect that when we're drinking. And, there's a lot of misconception around this because people always think that when, if they're having a high sugar drink, or, if it's something that has carbohydrates in it, that's more problematic because it's spiking glucose in that way. But it's a kind of a common misnomer, and I call this the vodka club theory.
Mm-hmm.
And I note that in the book, right? Because for a while, everyone moved over to drinking vodka club because it's low and it doesn't have sugar, it's lower in carbohydrates. But the challenge is that the ethanol, the actual molecule that is alcohol, which is what gets us drunk, is what actually will affect how our body releases hormones like insulin and glucagon, which regulate blood sugar. So this is happening at a kind of deeper physiological level rather than just an increase in blood sugar because of wine containing sugar, for example. So it's actually the ethanol, the molecule of alcohol itself, that the more we drink, we're training our body into these dysregulated hormones for blood sugar management. So this is why oftentimes someone who will, when we cut out alcohol, we might start to have those sugar cravings, because what's happening is we're actually falling into low blood sugar, especially if we're not having more frequent and consistent meals. So my kind of two biggest recommendations across the board for people who are early on in their journey is, one, increasing protein content throughout the day. So making sure that you're getting protein at every single meal and snack, and you're avoiding those kind of simple carbs or simple sugars by themselves. The other important thing is to make sure that you're having something to eat every 3 to 4 hours, because that's going to help keep blood sugar stable and help you avoid falling into those low blood sugar points, which when we hit that low blood sugar, that's when it's really hard to say no to a drink or to something sweet. So we really want to avoid getting into that state of stress, or that our body's state of stress of low blood sugar, because it's going to make it harder to say no.
It's really almost like fortifying ourselves to setting ourselves up for success with that. Because if we are focusing on just removing the alcohol and we aren't doing these other things, as you said, eating every few hours throughout the day, making sure we have proteins every time we eat, we can add to that when you do have fats, looking at plant-based fats, and along with those proteins and fiber-rich carbs, when you have carbs, those are all things that are going to take a lot longer to break down. So they're keeping you much more stable for longer. Doing that is going to essentially, I think of it as like that insulation or that fortification against having that, because as Brooke is talking about the sugar cravings, y'all, this is real. Brooke, I call it
it's real.
With Alcohol Free for 40, we have all these people, hundreds and hundreds of people, depending on the year, between 500 and 700 people who come through at our 6 different locations. And we have the kickoff sites, and we've got our whole lab team at each site throughout in 6 cities through the state. So they're drawing labs, inflammatory markers and liver enzymes, glucose, all the things that you would expect, and then more. We have one of our addiction specialists with Oshner who has really guided us on lab markers that when we first started this, I wasn't familiar with even, and we add a lot of these in. So I always tell someone, even if you say, oh, well, I get my blood work done every year, This is more and more in depth than what you would get. So if you're thinking about this, and if you're not in the Louisiana area to do this, go to alcoholfreefor40.com. You can see a list of all the lab markers that we do. But we do the lab markers, we do the physical markers, blood pressure, body composition, close-up photo of the face. And so we do all that at the very beginning, right after Mardi Gras, and we do it all 40 days later. It's actually, if someone's counting, it's a little bit more than 40, but alcohol free for 40 sounds better than alcohol free for 46, which is like, and Lent, they say Lent is 40 days. It's technically 46. So anyway, but at the end is when people come back and we have a really nice high % return rate. So I know as a scientist, you'll appreciate it's usually between a 70 and 80% return rate, which is very high for a community-based program. It's also very telling that people are very motivated by seeing their own personal data. They did all this at the beginning. If they have continued to not drink throughout this, they're really eager to see, how does that affect me personally? What does that black and white look like in my numbers? So when we're there at the beginning, we have a lot of interns that'll help support us and things. And I always tell them, pay attention to people's energy, because when they come through at the beginning, sometimes you may pick up on a little bit of a attention. It might be a freneticism. People have, especially if it's their first time doing it, some of them have high anxiety, and it can come across as an edginess, maybe even borderline unpleasant in some people. They may be a little prickly, and not always, but I always kind of guide them, like, just the whole energy. There's a little bit more of that. At the end of the 40 days, that 70 to 80% who's coming back because they've stayed pretty much or pretty much close to alcohol free for that entire time, those are the ones who are coming back, and the energy is so different because that pressure is gone. They feel that level of success. They were anxious at first. Can I even do this? Now they're here. They did it. But what we get, when I'm saying all that to get to on this sugar cravings, is we have ice cream confessions that happen so often. And it's not always ice cream. A lot of times it may be a different sweet of choice, but I would say the large majority of it is ice cream confessions. And in some cases, it's like, if they have a little bit here and there, I mean, we would both say, who cares? But when this is every single day, every single night, it's replacing one vice with another. And in some cases, their weight goes up, their body comp goes up, their inflammatory markers, their everything's going up. We're like, wait, like this is defeating the purpose, because there's a little bit, and then there's caving a little bit more to that vice. So what would be your guidance for people to avoid coming to us with this ice cream confessions in the first place?
Yeah, well, I have to first just say I can relate big time, because my sweet of choice when I first went alcohol free was ice cream, and it had to be on a cone. Like, I hadn't had ice cream on a cone in probably 10 years, but all of a sudden I had to be holding it while I'm eating it, like kind of like a drink, which was a very interesting kind of insight.
It's truly like ice cream is a thing. It's really funny.
Like, more than cookies. It has a lot to do with these physiological changes that are going on in the body, right? And one of the big discussions is around dopamine and needing that kind of hit of dopamine, but it's not necessarily dopamine, which is the kind of biggest piece here. That blood sugar is actually a big part of this. And regulating blood sugar through these increasing protein, increasing fiber, these nutrition recommendations can be really useful. And one thing that I recommend to everyone is, if you have something sweet, or if you need to have something sweet, either to have it alongside a meal so that you're not having just that quick carb or simple sugar by itself, or having it along with some type of protein or some type of healthy fat or fiber, so that you're not just getting, again, this quick increase in blood sugar and drop, which is going to create and contribute to more cravings beyond that. But the other thing is, this is where supplements can be really useful. So one of the things that I recommend to many of my clients, and my program, Functional Sobriety, we have supplement packs that are designed exclusively for cravings. But there's a supplement, it's an amino acid called L-glutamine, and it's something that can be really useful to take as needed whenever there is an active craving for either sugar or alcohol. So that's a great tool to consider, as well as it can be something that you can take really if you're having a craving for either the sugar or the alcohol, and it will kind of help take that craving away. Usually the cravings pass pretty quickly, 15 minutes, 20 minutes max. So if you can take yourself out of that environment that you're in where you're having a craving and distract yourself. Maybe that's going for a walk. Maybe that's calling a friend. Maybe that's checking your email for 15 minutes. Hopefully that's not driving more stress, but anything that you can do to kind of change that environment for 15 minutes. But again, things like supplements like an L-glutamine or my Craving Crusher pack actually has 4 different supplements in it that can help with stabilizing blood sugar and managing cravings. Those can be really, really useful to take as needed when you're really struggling and need that kind of extra support.
I think it's a really good point you made of the cravings typically pass, 15 minutes, maybe 30. And that's cravings for sugar. It's also good cravings for alcohol. So I think it's worth like saying that again and again. And I think I call it the witching hour for people, that those witching hours. And it's a lot of times when those cravings hit, it may be, like we said, as your glucose levels are dropping. For a lot of people, it's transition times. It's a transition from work to home, or it might be even after the kids go to bed and the house is quiet. Like whatever is that transition time can often be when we've typically reached for a drink. So we have that habit that's there and can be triggering that craving, or it can be physiological things like we're talking about, glucose levels dropping and such. So I think it's really important to know that to some degree, we're talking about, we want to try to help you not have to just white knuckle it, but to some degree, knowing that this will pass and thinking through ahead of time, when this hits, it's going to be short-lived, this craving, but what is that replacement behavior that I'm going to do instead? And already having that planned. And so when we think go for a walk, that's a really hard thing to say. I want to scotch on the rocks or I'll go for a walk. They don't seem like the same thing at all, but like that brisk walk can really help to drive down those stress hormones. It can help to bring about that sense of calmness, the relaxation, the very things that we're looking at from that wine or that scotch on the rocks or whatever it may be. And it doesn't have to be that you're doing anything that's a huge long commitment. It could literally be a 5-minute brisk walk around the block can make a huge difference. And so
absolutely,
not thinking that you have to do, I've got to go to a spin class or I've got to start with it. Like, don't overcomplicate it, y'all. It's just that little bit and that movement. I find the movement for me personally, and also for so many of our participants, physical movement is a really good replacer when those cravings do hit. And that would be the same for sugar and for alcohol. I'm curious, 2 of the supplements that I often look at for glucose control and then also therefore craving controls is chromium picolinate and alpha lipoic acid. Are these in the pack that you have, or are they something that we would add to it?
Chromium picolinate is part of that pack. Yeah. Alpha lipoic acid is not, but it's a blend of a few different amino acids, but also the chromium picolinate as well as N-acetylcysteine, NAC, which also has some really great research behind it for alcohol cravings.
Yeah. Let's definitely link to that. Can people order it online?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. It's available at functionalsobriety.com.
Okay. We'll link to that online for this podcast episode. And then also just for our listeners, if you're thinking about doing alcoholfreefor40.com or alcohol free for 40 this year, as this episode is airing with Brooke, we have a few more days that we're doing so Brooke, we have an early bird special. It's through January 15th, $39, but it's $49 for someone to sign up. So all those labs that we talked about twice, before and after, and all those physical markers, all of that and all of the support is $49 to do alcohol free for 40. And so,
amazing.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. And so at our kickoff events, hopefully we're going to have some of the copies of Brooke's book so that people can flip through it, see if this is something that, you may want to, I think it's can be just a really great tool. And then one of the big things that we do that we offer support throughout Alcohol Free for 40, every Monday midday, we have a Mindful Monday, and Brooke is going to be joining us to present and speak and inspire and share with our Mindful Monday. And so we'll make sure that we include the link to the book and things like the supplement pack and the link to the Functional Sobriety website for this episode. But then also, as you're thinking ahead to doing Alcohol Free for 40, start to use these tools. We talked about kind of fortifying yourself and like setting yourself up for success. I'm sure, Brooke, you've had feedback from people, and we have with Alcohol Free for 40. Some people, their third or their fourth year doing it is the first time they actually complete it. And they'll say, I lasted 10 days the first time, then 20, then, and each year they may feel, okay, it finally gets a little easier. And then, but they haven't given up. And each year they're feeling, and they feel discouraged at times, and they do beat themselves up for that, but then they come back for the next year and then it gets easier and easier. While we're on the topic of supplements, let's kind of keep going down that path, because I think from the nutrition perspective, there's often been a lot of conversation of, here's what alcohol depletes. It depletes these vitamins, it depletes these minerals, but there hasn't been a lot of talk about what are things that we can add from the nutrition perspective or, food or supplement perspective that can actually help support. So what are some other supplements, herbs, nutrients that you would say can really help to focus on?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it is pretty well understood. That's one of the things that we do know a lot about with alcohol is how it affects nutrient levels. And it affects nutrient levels in a couple of different ways. It affects our ability to absorb them. Because alcohol is a toxin, it requires more antioxidant nutrients in order to kind of eliminate it from the system. And because of its effects on the liver, it will also affect many of the nutrients that are kind of stored in the liver, things like B12 and B6 and folate, for example. But I think what we oftentimes hear is that we don't have nutrient depletion unless someone is a very heavy drinker, right? We know things like vitamin B1 deficiency can create something called Wernicke's encephalopathy, which is a psychosis that is, a more extreme example of someone having nutrient depletion from alcohol. But this is happening if we're consuming alcohol a few times per week. We are still having deficiencies and lowering of these nutrient levels. And this is really important to consider because these nutrients that are affected are the same ones that help with energy production, that help with mood and promoting positive mood, that help ward off things like anxiety. Magnesium, for example, which is our body's relaxing mineral. This is depleted when we consume alcohol, and yet relaxation is one of the things that we look to use alcohol for, right? And so, across the board, I love that you do the lab testing because it's important to get insight into if there are specific nutrient deficiencies, and even looking at things like vitamin D levels, which I see kind of chronically low in people who are using alcohol. And it's supported in the research that all of these nutrients are lowered. And it's an important part of the recovery process to begin repleting and replenishing some of those. So one of the core things that I recommend to all of my clients is a B vitamin complex, specifically a methylated complex. And this just means that it has some of the active forms of the B vitamins. So we're looking for things like methylcobalamin, methyl B12, and methylfolate as part of it. And again, these B vitamins are really chronically depleted with alcohol consumption. And again, critical for energy, for cellular health, for happy, positive mood, for the promotion of serotonin and dopamine in our brain. And so, a B vitamin complex is something I'm recommending for all of my clients. Magnesium is another big one to consider, especially if you're experiencing difficulty with sleep or difficulty with relaxation. About 70% of the US population is deficient in magnesium. So it's pretty likely that you may be deficient in that, and you might benefit from bringing in magnesium as part of that puzzle. And vitamin D is another great example because low vitamin D levels have been associated with depression and mood disorders. And so that's also something important to consider when we are, kind of embarking on this journey, especially, it's a dose dependent relationship. The more that you drink, the more likely it is that you are affected by these deficiencies. And I, as a doctor of nutrition, when I work one-on-one with clients, it's, we're doing these lab tests. We're looking to see what nutrients that people are deficient in. And, we don't always, when we go to our doctor and we have our standard blood work done, I love that you brought that up. Like oftentimes they run 2 or 3 quick things. They say, you're fine. Everything looks great. But they're not looking deeper at some of these areas. And it's really important that if you are feeling like you're struggling with this process, or you are experiencing a lot of challenges with stress, anxiety, and things that are triggering you to drink, that tells me that there's something awry in your body. And some of that lab testing and analysis can really point you in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that it's, I love those. Are also very approachable for people. And if you're looking at what can we add in, what can we focus on doing versus what are we just giving up? Okay, let's add in supplements that may help with cravings. Like you said, the L-glutamine creatine type blend that is in the craving packet that you talked about, that's on the functional sobriety site. But things like the B complex, methylated B complex, magnesium, vitamin D, these are things that are so supportive of whole body health anyway and wellness. And there's going to be very little risk of taking these. It's not, it's something that even if you don't have the luxury of having your blood work done and seeing supplementing with, 1,000 or 5,000 D, 500 or so of magnesium, and then that B complex, for most people, that's going to be just fine. And there's not going to be any reason not to, but there can be a lot of other whole body benefits of doing it. And then that combined with, like you said, eating frequently, let's make sure we have protein with those meals, those snacks. Let's make sure that we're getting some of that physical movement daily. We are scheduling in, we're planning ahead and kind of preemptively planning to have some physical movement when we know we have those witching hours or the transition time when that craving for alcohol or sugar may happen. All of those things are focusing on the positive, what we're putting in, not just, I can't drink, I can't have alcohol. So I think that can also help us. We're being proactive in what we're doing versus what we're not doing. So
absolutely.
Any other things that you would say? We haven't talked about gut health. Is there anything else on supplements though, before we switch over from supplements, nutrients, that are sort of some of your key high levels across the board for people?
Yeah, so I think we talked about several of them, including the L-glutamine and some of the other amino acids that are included in the Cravings pack. So again, my company, Functional Sobriety, we have different packs that are actually, we have a Cravings pack, but also other packs that are designed depending on where you're at in your sobriety journey. So if you're under 6 months, there's a pack that has kind of the critical nutrients that you need to replenish. We have packs for people who are more sober curious and are maybe still having alcohol infrequently. And so there's a variety of different things there. But I would definitely say if you're interested in learning more about supplements, to read the book, because there's some more details and description on, especially if you have, anxiety, for example, what you might kind of use to support that more specifically.
And like we said earlier, Brooke does an amazing job of taking the science, breaking it down, presenting it in a way that's super conversational, but also it's like just that right blend of informative and filled with content, yet approachable, but not just fluff, And what I was saying to Brooke is before, I was like, have you written for public consumption much before? Because it's not easy to have that fine line in there. There's that, like, it's a really sweet spot that you've achieved with that. And so if you are interested in learning more on it, I would highly, highly recommend the book. I've already been telling friends about it, in conversations, even just last night at a party, it came up. So I would highly recommend it. So gut and our microbiome, and alcohol and the gut microbiome. I feel like one of the things that, like, it's like dietitian, humor, which is like just kind of like, but it's as if everybody had like a healthy gut microbiome, like we feel like there would be like a greater sense of peace across the world. Like I
agree with that.
It seems like everything that comes from microbiome research, it's like it affects every aspect of our being. And I think there's so much that we don't give credence to, our psyche, our stress levels. There's so much that we're not even thinking and associating with our gut health, that it's all tied in together. And when we look at the things that are beneficial for gut health, the first thing I think we think of is like, yogurt, probiotics and, fermented foods are really good for our gut health. We talk a lot about what's good for the gut health, but a lot of us aren't so aware of what's damaging to that gut health.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an important topic because, like you said, there's a lot of discussion around gut health in today's day and age. And we talk a lot about taking probiotics and these beneficial things that we can do for our gut. But most people, if you were to ask them, they wouldn't know what would be harmful to the gut, to the gut microbiome and our gut health. And alcohol is extremely disruptive to the gut microbiome, unfortunately. There is research that shows that it changes the bacterial content, that it decreases probiotic activity, that it can increase some of the more harmful microbes in the gut. It decreases bacterial diversity. And it can actually contribute to overgrowth of some of the types of yeasts and bacteria that can actually feed off of sugar and alcohol. So if you have long-term alcohol consumption and you have cravings, some of those cravings can also be rooting from GI imbalances or imbalances in the gut microbiome. And so it's an important part to consider. And when I pulled together research for this book, it really, we aren't talking more broadly about alcohol's effects on the gut. We know that there is harmful effects in terms of contributing to cancers and things like that, but we're not talking about the more granular or almost more like daily effects and things that are affecting. Yes, most people aren't worried long-term about cancer, or they are, but not necessarily when we are taking a drink, we're thinking, about that risk factor. But even just a couple of drinks a week can be disrupting the gut microbiome, but also the lining of the gut, and be contributing to things like intestinal permeability, which can really cause inflammation and be part of the development of autoimmune disorders and systemic other types of immune issues.
I think you're right. There's so much there on inflammation and gut health and that connection of whole body health. You mentioned cancer. One of the things that always strikes me is when we have Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and places, clinics will do mimosas and mammograms and things like that. And it drives me crazy. And, restaurants are like, oh, we're going pink. And they have these pink cocktails that are full of alcohol and full of sugar and probably artificial food colors as well. And I'm like, these are like the very things that we really want to avoid, because the link between our alcohol consumption and breast cancer specifically is very, very strong. And there's also the correlation of alcohol's effects on our hormone levels as well. Estrogen to some degree, testosterone. So all of these things are so intertwined. And so I think when we're thinking about going back to that original question of like, what is my relationship with alcohol? And when you look at whole body well-being, and where are you in that space? Do you feel like you're overall, like things are pretty good? Like you don't have a lot that is holding you back from doing the things that you want to do? Or are there certain things that you are struggling with, and you may not even think that those hormonal imbalances, the estrogen, the other types of hormones, you may not even think about that as being related to that alcohol consumption, but realizing that all of those things are so intricately tied. I think, this is a short introduction and short kind of touching on a lot of, there's a lot of content to discuss here. And so Brooke, I'm thinking, like, as you and I are talking, I'm like, I think in the future, I'd love to have us back and we can kind of drill even further into certain areas of this. But in the meantime, as you're listening to this podcast, if you're thinking about doing our Alcohol Free for 40 challenge, reach out. We want to have you. You go to alcoholfreefor40.com. There's links to sign up in your area, or you can follow along with us in our Facebook group, Alcohol Free for 40. It's our 2024 Facebook group. We have right at about 2,000 people there, lots of support, lots of camaraderie. Also picking up Brooke's book. This is amazing. Going to our website. We'll link to that in the show notes. And I think, kind of to wrap us up, you do a good job in the book also of taking out the all or nothing. So it doesn't have to be that overwhelming idea of I'm never drinking again. And so if someone's listening and they're kind of on the fence about, do I want to go this route? Do I want to kind of start playing around with some of these changes? What's your guidance to someone if they're kind of like on the fence about thinking, am I going to dip my toe in the space or not?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you for asking. And I'll just mention to say that these types of books and resources can be really useful in helping to steer your direction and help you find a little bit more clarity around what's right for you. But also, while you're doing a challenge, having some of these resources, a book to read, some podcasts to listen to, etc., can be really useful in keeping you focused on the goal and kind of educating you along the way instead of, again, white knuckling it, kind of surrounding yourself with these resources that can support you and inspire you. And what I'll say to answer your question, and I get asked this question a lot, and I think that innately we know if and when it is right for us to start considering alcohol reduction or elimination, that if you have that kind of pull in your gut that says maybe this is something I should explore, then I truly believe it's worth exploring. I share a lot in my story in the book, but also when I speak kind of more publicly, that eliminating alcohol was one of the most terrifying things that I ever did in my life. I didn't know a life without alcohol. It was really difficult to conceive of how I would, go to a wedding or have my birthday or go on vacation. Some of these things that we oftentimes start thinking so far out in the distance, like the idea of keeping it in the day and focusing on just the day that we're in is really helpful, especially in the beginning. But even though it was one of the hardest and scariest things that I ever did, it was one of the most rewarding things. And I can share that when I eliminated alcohol, all of the pieces of the puzzle of my life started to fall together in a way that I had struggled to find while I was drinking. That something like writing a book was only a mere dream that I had had for many years. And once I quit drinking and got sober, all of the pieces of the puzzle of that fell together for me. So I truly believe that it is an experience that will change your life, even if you go for 40 days, for 30 days, whatever, that time frame is. You will learn something new about yourself. You will experience change in some way. And whether that means you stay alcohol-free long-term doesn't really matter. All that matters is that you gain and you learn something about yourself in this process.
I love it. I love it. It's, I feel like you speak such a language that is so relatable for people, resonates with people. It's a message that I think is so important, is so valuable, and it's shared in such a way that is so non-threatening to people. So I'm grateful that you put this book out, and I'm grateful for your time in this podcast, and then for your support that we'll have from you coming up in the Alcohol Free for 40 challenge. This is amazing. And I think for our listeners, hopefully we'll be able to have Brooke back. And if there's certain areas that we've talked about that you'd want to hear more about, let us know also.
Thanks so much for having me, Molly. I hope for all those who are listening that you took a little something away with you today that will inspire your journey. And I hope that if you read the book, that it inspires some change for you.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for Dr. Brooke Scheller joining us today. I just really love her energy. I love her ability to just really seamlessly translate information that can feel really heavy. It can feel really hard to sift through and see what really matters, what's important to us. And she's just incredible at seamlessly translating that into just a very conversational tone and real world content that we can start applying right now. So I'll include the links that we talked about in the show notes of this episode. Always, I want to know what you think, and especially with this one, I want to know what you think. I'll link to her book. I'll link to Alcohol Free for 40, all these things to give you the tools, give you the resources as well. Reach out to me. Let me know how it's impacted you. If you've tried other things that have been incredibly beneficial to you as well, I want to know about it. Always. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next time for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.